All right, Jeff. Thanks for coming. Everybody, so this is Jeff from Rockfish, and he's going to tell you why his company is called Rockfish. And when he does, you'll understand a little bit of the mystique of what he does. So Jeff is a Seattle member, and I met him, how long has it been now? 8 months or something like that. And I heard his story, I thought, oh my God, that's so cool. And I told my daughters about it. My daughters, are huge fans of treasure movies of various kinds, as am I. And I have all these nostalgic feelings about watching all of the treasure movies with my daughters. So when I met him, I couldn't wait to tell my daughters, and they were thrilled. They both want to invest in your company, by the way. You're going to have to figure out how to make that work.
Okay.
But in any case, so when Jeff told me the story, I wanted to share with others, so I invited him to come share that story with some other founders and investors in Seattle. And then we did a couple other places, and so I'm excited to have him down here now in Palo Alto to share a story with you. Jeff, do your thing, man.
All right, thanks. Well, my PR consultant always says, dare to be brief, but this is a story that is hard to boil down. So, Bob, how much time do I have?
20 minutes.
20 minutes? I can do it in 20 minutes. All right, so once upon a time, I grew up on a place called Mercer Island, which is sandwiched between Seattle and Bellevue. And when I was growing up, my dad was a research engineer at Boeing, working on all sorts of R&D projects. And he told me that in the lake that surrounded Mercer Island, that there were some World War II airplanes that had sunk in the lake during the war. And I thought, that'd be really cool. And, I was watching John Wayne movies and all that sort of stuff. And so I thought, someday I'm going to go get one of those. So when I got to high school, I learned how to scuba dive and, kind of kept the dream alive. And eventually I found, using sonar equipment, a World War II airplane on the bottom of Lake Washington. And it didn't have an engine in it. And so I knew that it hadn't flown there. And it must have been dumped by the Navy in Lake Washington. So I wrote a letter to the Pentagon and said, hey, I found this airplane. Did you ever dump anything in the lake? They're like, they think I'm some sort of radical environmentalist. And they're like, no, we never dumped anything in the lake. I'm like, great, I'm going to salvage it and sell it to some collector. So I did. So when I was a freshman at the University of Washington, I salvaged this World War II airplane from the bottom of Lake Washington. And then I promptly got sued by the federal government. And they said, the airplane's still ours. I'm like, what do you mean? I have the letter from the Pentagon. Look, see? And they're like, the letter means nothing. I'm like, what? So next thing I know, I have the full weight of the U.S. government against me trying to get the airplane. And mind you, I'm 19, right? So I'm like, well, let's see. What do I have? I have my 1967 Mustang that they could take away from me. But other than that, they're not going to get much. So I'm going to try to fight them. And I was in a fraternity at the University of Washington. One of the big alumni there owned a big law firm in Seattle. And he's like, yeah, after a few beers at some event, he's like, yeah, I'll represent you. And so he put together a legal team of 3 prominent maritime lawyers in Seattle. They were all ex-military. And we went to trial. And I'll never forget, we were walking from his office, which is in the Columbia Tower. We're walking up to the federal courthouse. And he's kind of a short guy, a little heavy set. And he's huffing and puffing and carrying his bag. And he goes, I don't know how this is going to go. I don't do federal court. I'm like, what? So anyway, we go to federal court, and the judge was a guy named John Kuhnauer, who's still on the bench today. He was one of the first people on one of the recent rulings in the Trump administration, and they represented him as a radical Seattle lawyer. Not the case. He was a Reagan appointee, very conservative guy. So we went to trial, and the first trial date was set for December 7th. Anyone know what that is? Pearl Harbor Day. Not a great day for the Navy. They asked to have the date changed, and they did. And we went to trial in July of the next year, and we won the case and won clear and free title to the airplane. So we won a constitutional issue. And last August 8th, 40 years later, the airplane flew. It's in Colorado Springs and has been restored to flying condition. And it's one of the rarest airplanes from World War II. And so the whole thing has come full cycle and it got restored. So while I was doing all this stuff, I thought, there's got to be something more interesting than this, these soggy World War II airplanes. We actually later recovered 5 more of them. But there's got to be something out here with treasure. And so there's a book of the Northwest history, and in there I learned about this one particular ship. And it said right in the description, it said $78,801 in treasure. I'm like, great, I'm gonna go find that someday. So I pursued the project a little bit. I did a bunch of research on it, and The most important thing is to understand that there's something of value there, right? And so I did all this research, and I was able to find a diary that was, or let's call it a journal, that was written in 1878, so 3 years after the ship sank. And in there it described that there was not just the gold that the bank was shipping, but there was a lot of other gold, and it corroborated it in a way that was very valid. So I began my career. I started working for different companies, and I started working for a company that built underwater robotics equipment. It was based in Aberdeen, Scotland. I got really bored with how long the sales cycle took, and so when I found out some guys from Microsoft were starting an electronic mapping company, I went to work with them. The company was called Noble Tech, and we quickly spun that up. It was bootstrapped. We got to about 25 employees, and then sold it off to eventually to Boeing. That company had the great hockey stick, sales curve. We actually doubled our sales every year for 5 years in a row, which was really fun. We were in a very competitive market. I just loved competing with other companies. It was a fantastic job. We developed some great technology. If you use like a Garmin chart plotter out on the water, you've used some of the technology that I created at that company. And then I was out of the industry for a couple of years, and then went to another startup. And all this time, I kept a separation between my vocation and my avocation, right? So my vocation was, focused on navigation, but I was always interested in finding this shipwreck because it's like it had treasure on it. So, I pursued it kind of in the background. I had met this famous treasure hunter down in Florida. I had also had a lot of problems with the government. We're only one of the two people that have ever won a case like this against the government. But the thing I noted is how he struggled, while he was building this company to find this treasure. It was really difficult to fund it and all that sort of stuff. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to keep my day job and, pursue it in a different way. So I brought in some different partners, and they funded some expeditions, and it appeared that they didn't find the wreck. I mean, we searched a big area, we used the best equipment, and it's like you'd think, okay, we're going to find it, but we didn't. And so, years go by, and I'm just like kind of getting frustrated with it because I know it's a really good project. And the thing about this type of project is, if you start some tech company and you've got 5 competitors and you do pretty well, but maybe you're not the top company, that company still has value. And what I'm doing, if you're in second place, you get nothing. There is no prize for second place. And so you have to win, or that's it. You've lost everything that you put into it, right? So during this time period, I had 5 or 6 other competitors that were looking for the same thing. And it was really nerve-wracking because, again, they're out there using this technology. They could stumble upon the wreck. So time went by, and the second navigation company I was involved with is called Rose Point, and I got to a point where I was doing more business development than the company could really process, and so I'm like, look, I'm going to take a sabbatical. So my wife gave me a 1-year sabbatical, and I'm like, great. And 3 years later, I found the shipwreck. So a little bit about the ship. So the ship is a sidewheel steamer. It was built in 1850 for the California Gold Rush. It was in and out of San Francisco, hundreds of times. And it was on a voyage from Victoria, British Columbia in November of 1875. It set sail with a very large amount of gold on it. It was from a gold rush that you guys have never heard of. So the California Gold Rush in 1848 and the Alaska Gold Rush in 1898. Well, right in the middle, geographically and chronologically, is this gold rush called the Cassiar Gold Rush. It's kind of east of southeast Alaska, and it was a pretty big gold rush for about 5 or 6 years. And just by coincidence, a lot of the gold from both 1874 and 1875 ended up on this ship. So the ship set sail on November 4th, 1875, heads out into the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and 12 hours later, everybody but 2 people had perished. So there were about 400 people on board, and it is the worst maritime disaster to date on the west coast of the United States. It's an absolute miracle that the 2 guys survived. One of them was on wreckage. No lifeboats got off of the ship. And one of them was on wreckage for 40 hours, and he was picked up about 25 miles north. And the other guy was not picked up, again, not in a life raft, 80 hours later. So it's November, right? I'm thinking, well, it was an El Nino year. It was warm. No, 2 weeks later, there were sleighs in downtown Victoria, horse-drawn sleighs. So it was not, warm conditions, but somehow these guys survived. Amazingly enough, just kind of like the Titanic story, the granddaughter of one of the survivors is still alive, and I have met her. And she can tell me stories directly from her grandfather. It's just an amazing story. So she's in her 90s and just, I'd say she's 94 going on 80. Incredible condition. So, in the fall of 2022, I tracked down the location, and we used every bit of science and technology that we could to find the ship. But ultimately what led to it wasn't the technology, it was oral histories and information I got from commercial fishermen. So remember, I was in the navigation business. I go to trade shows, and some guy would come up to me and say, yeah, I'm a commercial fisherman, I work on the West Coast. I'm like, really? Well, did you ever find anything interesting in your nets, And eventually that led me to a guy that had brought up some coal in his net, and I was able to get a sample of that coal, have it chemically tested, and I was able to identify it to a coal mine that was owned by the company that owned the ship. And so that led me to okay, and eventually I got the logbook from his tow where he had gotten the coal, and we thought for sure, okay, it's right here where he lost his net, and eventually went for it with some grappling hooks and brought up this coal. Because he didn't bring up just one piece of coal, he brought like a wheelbarrow load of coal. And so the idea was, well, Occam's razor, the simplest story is true, the ship has got to be right down there. No. So now we call that $100,000 reef, because that's about how much money we spent, proving it was the wrong spot, right? So eventually we tracked it down, we searched all these different areas, and we did a great deal of probability analysis, and we did find the ship in a cell that was immediately adjacent to one of our high probability cells. So we kind of had a region of high probability. And so was the math correct? Yeah, I think so, but it's very subject to interpretation, like what generated that probability map. But it did turn out, and there it was, right next to the highest probability area. So I raised the capital to engage in this effort through friends and family, and one of my friends is Nils right here, who supported the project in the early days. And again, these are the guys who invested in an opportunity that pretty likely is going to go to zero if someone else beats you to it. There's no second chance to do anything. So I appreciate the support I got from him and from the other investors. But one of the things that I learned, and I think is kind of fascinating for me, is like when you're raising capital, how strong your personal network really is, and how challenging it is to start raising capital outside the personal network. I mean, that's still something that I'm learning about. So when I was at this event was it November?
January.
Was it January? Okay.
In San Francisco.
No, it was the one before that. Anyway, on one of the earlier events, during the event, I get a call from my general manager, and he said, hey, there was a court filing today. And so when you find a ship and you try to get ownership in it, you end up in a lawsuit that is you versus an unidentified vessel. Well, the unidentified vessel doesn't have lawyers, but the interested parties that may have an interest in that get involved. And so one of the groups that got involved in our case was the insurance company, and we eventually settled with them. So we settled with them, and the arrangement we made is that we would pay them 1.598% for the cargo that they had insured, and we get the rest of it. Right? Well, in order to do that agreement, that was mediated in federal court. They had to wake up somebody in London at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, sorry to wake you up, but I know this deal sucks, but will you sign it? The person's like, okay, and they did. Well, they weren't very happy with that, and so they tried to get out of it. And so here I am, really beginning to raise capital outside of my network. And I get this call at the event, right? I'm sitting on the couch and I'm like, okay, what? And so the insurance company tried to get out of it. And so the next morning, Bob and I had breakfast. I'm like, Bob, I'm really sorry, but this is a really long story. I'm about to tell you about this whole thing, but it took like 45 minutes to go through the whole thing. And I'm like, I'm trying to raise capital right now. What should I do? And Bob's like, well, I had a similar thing happen to me many years ago, where we couldn't raise capital. And he goes, my advice to you is stop raising capital. So basically, from that time period, I had to stop raising capital at a time period where I needed capital, right? And so what did I do? I like, hey, sweetheart, do you mind if we just write a big check? And so that's what we did. And so we knew that they wouldn't prevail, and so the judge ruled about 5 weeks ago, and then we waited for the time period for that to expire, and it did, for their appeal to expire, and they didn't. Bob was talking about, where'd the name Rockfish come from? So we tried to be as efficient as possible in everything that we did. We built a lot of our own, equipment, to recover and explore the area. And we didn't really want to answer a lot of questions to people. So we named our company Rockfish, because if you tell people you're doing rockfish research, they never ask another question. That's it. They're like, oh, okay, cool, whatever. And it worked most of the places. I remember one time we came in, had to drop off a crew member, and this was during COVID, and we told the harbor master at this little town out in the middle of nowhere on the Washington coast, and he's like, I don't know what you guys are doing, but you're not studying rockfish. So it worked on most people. So that, in a nutshell, is my project. And I love talking to you guys about your companies. I've been involved in 2 successful startups that were mostly bootstrapped, and then one trading company, which in the medical supply area, which has done really well, a company called Amex, which is a disposable medical supply company. So thank you for hearing my story.